Stay with me, because what happened on that road should have ended a life, but instead, it exposed a truth no one was ready for. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing across the empty highway as snow slammed against the black SUV in relentless waves, visibility down to almost nothing, the world reduced to white noise and flashing hazard lights blinking in the darkness. And inside the vehicle, Emily Carter sat frozen, one hand pressed protectively over her 8-month pregnant belly, her breath shallow. Her fingers trembling not just from the cold creeping in through the doors but from something deeper, something she couldn't yet name, because 10 minutes ago, she still believed she was going home, still believed her husband when he said they needed air, still believed that a drive through the countryside might fix the silence that had grown between them. But now the engine idled in the middle of nowhere, snow already piling against the tires, and Richard Hayes didn't look at her, not once, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed straight ahead as if she were no longer there, as if the woman carrying his child had already disappeared from his world, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that doesn't come from peace but from decision. "Get out, Emily," he said, and for a second, the words didn't register, they floated somewhere between disbelief and denial, because this wasn't how stories like hers were supposed to go, not after the wedding, not after the promises, not after the nights she stayed up waiting for him to come home, telling herself it was just work, just stress, just a phase, but the sound of the door unlocking cut through everything, sharp and final, and her heart began to pound, slow at first, then faster, each beat echoing in her ears as she turned toward him, searching his face for something familiar, something human. "Richard, it's below freezing," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm, and still, he didn't look at her, not even when the baby shifted inside her, a small, urgent movement that made her inhale sharply, grounding her in the reality of what was happening, because this wasn't just about her anymore, it was about the life she carried, the life that depended on her staying warm, staying safe, staying alive. And outside, the wind roared louder, pushing against the car like it wanted in, like it was waiting, patient and inevitable, and somewhere in the distance, a single streetlight flickered, barely visible through the storm, casting a faint, cold glow over the snow-covered road, a road that stretched endlessly in both directions with no other cars, no other signs of life. Just silence between gusts of wind and the steady blink of those hazard lights, and then, without warning, Richard reached across her, his hand cold, efficient, and opened her door, and the sound of it broke something inside her, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, irreversible crack, like ice forming beneath the surface, and the cold air rushed in instantly, sharp and biting, stealing her breath as she instinctively pulled her coat tighter, her mind racing, trying to understand, trying to fix, trying to rewind to a moment where this could still be stopped. But there was no rewind, only the present, only the storm, only the man who had already decided she didn't belong beside him anymore, and as the wind wrapped around her, as the snow touched her skin for the first time, she realized something with a clarity that felt almost unreal. This wasn't an argument, this wasn't a mistake, this was an ending, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The cold hit her lungs like a shock, sharp and immediate, stealing the air from her chest as her boots sank into several inches of fresh snow, the door still open behind her, the warmth of the car already fading like a memory she could not hold on to, and for a moment she just stood there, stunned, one hand gripping the edge of the door, as if that small piece of metal could anchor her to the life she had just been pushed out of. "Richard, please," she said, her voice shaking now, not loud, not dramatic, just fragile, the kind of sound that carried everything she had not said for months. But inside the car, there was only silence, and then the soft click of the locks, final and unmistakable, followed by the shift of gears as the vehicle began to move, slowly at first, tires struggling against the snow, then gaining traction, pulling away from her inch by inch, and she took a step forward instinctively, her balance uncertain. On the icy ground, her free hand moving protectively over her stomach as the baby shifted again, stronger this time, as if reacting to the sudden drop in temperature. "Stay with me," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to the child or to herself, because the fear had finally arrived, not all at once, but in layers, creeping in like the cold, settling into her bones, making everything feel heavier, slower, more real, and as the taillights of the SUV blurred into the white storm, disappearing completely within seconds, the silence that followed was overwhelming, broken only by the relentless wind and the faint crunch of snow beneath her feet as she tried to move. But every step felt wrong, her body not responding the way it should, her breath coming in short bursts that turned instantly into mist, the temperature dropping with every passing second, somewhere around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe lower with the wind. And she knew enough to understand what that meant, not in exact numbers, not in statistics, but in instinct, in the quiet realization that this was not a place you stayed for long, not like this, not without protection, not with a life depending on you. And she turned slowly, scanning the empty road, the endless stretch of white in both directions, no headlights, no houses visible, just darkness beyond the storm, except for one thing, far off to her left, barely visible through the swirling snow, a faint outline of something larger, something structured, maybe a house, maybe just her imagination, but it was enough to give her a direction, a reason to keep moving, and she shifted her weight forward, taking another step, then another, her boots slipping slightly as the wind pushed against her, each movement deliberate, careful, because falling was not an option, not now, not here, and her mind began to drift, not away from reality, but into fragments of it, flashes of memory that felt almost cruel in their timing, the sound of laughter at their wedding, the warmth of a summer afternoon when she first told him she was pregnant, the way he had smiled, the way he had held her hand, and for a moment, she questioned everything, not in anger, not yet, but in confusion, in the quiet, aching question of how something that once felt so certain could unravel so completely, so quickly. But the wind did not care about her questions, and the cold did not wait for answers, and as her fingers began to lose feeling, as the distance between her and that faint structure felt both impossibly far and dangerously close, she realized that whatever this was, whatever had just happened, it was no longer about understanding him, it was about surviving long enough to never need that answer again. The snow swallowed sound as she moved, each step quieter than the last, as if the world itself was closing in, softening everything except the cold that kept pressing harder against her skin, and Emily Carter focused on one thing only, that faint outline ahead, a shape that flickered in and out of view as the wind shifted, sometimes clearer, sometimes gone completely, like hope that refused to stay still, and she kept her eyes on it, forcing her body forward one step at a time, her breath uneven now, each inhale shallow, each exhale visible in short bursts that vanished almost instantly into the storm, and her fingers, once trembling, were beginning to feel strangely distant, like they no longer fully belonged to her, and that scared her more than anything else, not the silence, not the empty road, but that slow, creeping numbness that made everything feel unreal, like she was walking through a dream she could not wake from. And she pressed her hand tighter against her stomach, feeling for movement, waiting, and then there it was, a small shift, a gentle push from within, and she let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "I am here," she whispered, her voice barely more than air. "I am still here." And the words grounded her, pulled her back into the moment, because as long as she could say that, as long as she could feel that response, she had something to fight for, something that mattered more than the cold, more than the fear, and she adjusted her stance, leaning slightly into the wind, her boots crunching softly against the snow as she moved again, the distance to that structure impossible to measure, every step feeling both like progress and like standing still, and then, suddenly, her foot slipped, not dramatically, not violently, just enough to send her off balance for a split second, her body reacting instantly, her hands reaching out, her weight shifting to avoid falling, because instinct took over where strength was beginning to fade, and she steadied herself, her heart pounding now, faster than before, the rhythm loud in her ears, reminding her that she was still moving, still alive, still in control, even if only barely, and she paused for a moment, not to rest, but to orient herself, turning her head slightly, scanning the darkness again. And that was when she saw it more clearly, not just a vague outline anymore, but windows, faint lights glowing through the storm, warm and steady, unmistakable, a house, A real house, not imagined, not distant beyond reach, but there, somewhere ahead and slightly uphill, and something shifted inside her then, not relief exactly, but a sharp, focused determination, the kind that does not come from comfort but from necessity, because now there was no question about direction, no uncertainty about where to go. Only the distance that still remained, and she began to move. Again, more deliberately this time, each step placed with care, her body heavier, her movements slower, but her purpose clearer, and somewhere behind those lit windows someone was there, someone who did not know her, someone who had no reason to expect her, but someone who represented something she needed more than anything else in that moment: warmth, safety, a chance, and she held on to that thought as tightly as she could, repeating it silently with each step, as the wind continued to push against her, as the cold continued to creep deeper, as the space between her and that light slowly, painfully began to close. The light did not move, it did not flicker out, it stayed there, steady and real, and that was the only thing that mattered now, because Emily Carter could feel time changing around her, not in minutes or seconds, but in something slower and heavier, like her body was beginning to drift out of sync with the world, her steps no longer as precise, her balance requiring more effort, and she focused harder. Narrowing everything down to a single goal: reach the house, just reach the house, and she repeated it again and again in her mind like a rhythm to walk to, left foot then right foot, slow but forward, always forward, and the snow rose higher in places, brushing against her ankles, then her calves, making each step more difficult than the last, her breathing louder now in her ears, her chest tightening slightly as the cold air filled her lungs, and she tried to take deeper breaths but they did not come easily, so she adjusted, shorter breaths, controlled, steady, just enough to keep moving, and then another small movement inside her, softer this time, but still there, and she closed her eyes for half a second, holding on to it, letting that small sign remind her that she was not alone in this, that every step she took mattered twice, and when she opened her eyes again the house was closer, still distant, but no longer just a shape. She could see the slope of the roof, the outline of a porch, the glow of multiple windows now, warm light spilling out into the storm like a quiet promise, and something in her chest shifted, not relief yet, but something close. Something that pushed her to take another step even when her legs felt heavier than before, and then something else changed. Subtle at first, a sound beneath the wind, faint but distinct, a low hum that did not belong to the storm, and she turned her head slightly, her vision blurring at the edges for a moment before settling again, and there it was, mounted high near the edge of the property line, a small security camera, its tiny red indicator light blinking steadily, watching, recording, present. And she stared at it for a second longer than necessary, because the realization came slowly: someone could see this. Someone might already be seeing this, and the thought sent a fragile surge of energy through her, not strong, not lasting, but enough to keep going, enough to remind her that she was no longer completely invisible out here, and she adjusted her direction slightly, angling toward the driveway. She could now make out beneath the snow, the ground more even there, her steps a fraction steadier, and the house loomed larger with each movement. The details sharpening, the front door visible now, the outline of steps leading up, and she focused on that door the way she had focused on the light before, shrinking the world down again, step by step, breath by breath, until everything else disappeared, until there was only the path ahead and the quiet determination that refused to let her stop. Even as her body urged her to slow, even as the cold pressed deeper, even as her vision dimmed slightly at the corners, and somewhere inside, beneath the exhaustion and the fear, a single thought held steady, not loud, not dramatic, but clear: if she could just reach that door, everything could still change. The driveway felt different beneath her feet, less uneven, more solid, and for a moment Emily Carter almost stumbled forward from the sudden change, her body struggling to adjust, her balance shifting as she stepped onto the packed surface, and the house now stood directly in front of her, no longer distant, no longer uncertain, but real and close and impossibly still compared to the chaos of the storm behind her. And the lights inside glowed warmly through wide windows, casting soft, golden reflections onto the snow, a stark contrast to the cold blue darkness that surrounded everything else, and she focused on the front steps, just a few yards away now, a distance that should have taken seconds but felt stretched, slowed, as if time itself had thickened around her, and she moved carefully, lifting her foot, placing it down, then again, each motion deliberate, her breathing shallow but steady. Her hand still pressed against her stomach as if that single point of contact could keep everything grounded, and then she reached the base of the steps and paused, not by choice but because her body demanded it, her legs trembling slightly, her vision dimming at the edges for just a moment longer than before, and she blinked hard, forcing clarity back, forcing herself to stay present, because stopping too long felt dangerous, like something she might not recover from, and she looked up at the door, just a few steps above her. Solid, closed, waiting, and she gathered what strength she had left and lifted her foot onto the first step, then the next, her movements slower now, heavier, but still moving, always moving, and when she reached the top, she stood there for a second, staring at the door, her breath visible in short bursts, her fingers no longer responding the way she wanted, but she raised her hand anyway, slowly, deliberately, and knocked, once, the sound soft against the wood, almost lost beneath the wind, and she waited, listening, her heart pounding in her ears, seconds stretching, no movement from inside, no immediate response, and doubt flickered briefly, sharp and unwelcome. What if no one was there? What if the lights meant nothing? What if she had come this far for nothing? But then she knocked again, a little harder this time, her strength fading but her intent clear, and as her hand dropped back to her side, she leaned slightly against the door, just enough to steady herself, not enough to give in, and the cold pressed against her back. The wind still reaching even here, and her eyes began to close for just a fraction too long before she forced them open again, focusing on the space in front of her, on the idea that someone, somewhere inside, might hear, might notice, might come, and then, from somewhere beyond the door, faint but unmistakable, there was a sound, a shift, something moving, and she held on to that sound with everything she had left, because it meant she was not too late, not yet. The sound behind the door came again, clearer this time, a slow set of footsteps approaching from within, steady and unhurried, and Emily Carter held on to that rhythm like it was the only thing keeping her upright, her body leaning slightly forward now, her shoulder brushing against the cold wood as she tried to stay conscious, because the world around her was beginning to blur in a way she could no longer fully control. The edges of her vision dimming and brightening in uneven waves, her thoughts slowing, slipping between clarity and something softer, something distant, and she forced herself to focus on one thing, the door, just the door, because if it opened, everything could still change, and then it did, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with a quiet click followed by a slow movement inward, warm light spilling out instantly, wrapping around her like something she had almost forgotten existed, and in that light stood a man. Tall, composed, his expression shifting from neutral curiosity to sharp concern in a single second as he took in the scene in front of him, the snow, the storm, and Emily standing there barely holding herself up, her coat dusted white, her breath uneven, her hand still resting protectively over her stomach, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke, because the situation explained itself without words, and then he stepped forward, not rushing, not hesitating, but moving with a kind of controlled urgency that felt deliberate. "Come inside," he said, his voice calm but firm, the kind of tone that did not ask for permission, it simply created direction, and Emily tried to respond, tried to form words, but what came out was barely sound, more breath than voice, and it did not matter, because he had already reached her, already guiding her gently across the threshold, the warmth inside hitting her all at once, not painful, not overwhelming, but sudden enough to make her knees weaken, her body reacting to the change faster than her mind could process it, and she felt the shift immediately, the absence of wind, the stillness of the air, the quiet that replaced the storm, and it was almost too much, almost enough to make her close her eyes completely, to let go, but she held on just a little longer, because something inside her refused to stop yet, not until she was sure. Not until she knew she had made it far enough. And the man closed the door behind them, sealing out the cold with a solid, final sound, and as he turned back to her, his eyes moved quickly, assessing, understanding more in seconds than most would in minutes, and he guided her toward a nearby chair, steady, careful, making sure each step she took was supported, grounded, real, and as she lowered herself down, the weight she had been carrying, physical and otherwise, seemed to settle all at once. Her shoulders dropping slightly, her breath coming a little easier though still uneven, and she looked up at him, her vision struggling to stay focused, but she saw enough, the calm in his expression, the clarity, the absence of panic, and it anchored her in a way she could not explain, because in that moment, in that quiet space, she understood something without needing to ask. She was no longer alone, and somewhere beyond the walls of that house, the storm continued to rage, unseen now, unheard, but no longer the only force shaping what would happen next. The warmth settled slowly, not all at once, but in layers, moving from the surface of her skin inward, and Emily Carter sat there trying to adjust to it, her hands resting loosely in her lap now, her fingers still unresponsive, her breathing uneven but no longer sharp with cold, and across from her, the man moved with quiet efficiency, pulling a thick blanket from the back of a chair and placing it gently around her shoulders, not asking, not hesitating, just acting with a kind of calm certainty that made everything feel more controlled, more stable, and she let the fabric settle around her, the weight of it grounding, real, something she could feel even through the numbness, and for a moment she closed her eyes. Not fully, just enough to steady herself, to gather what little strength she had left, and when she opened them again, he was already kneeling slightly in front of her, not too close, but close enough to be present, his expression focused, his voice low and steady. "You are safe now," he said, each word clear, deliberate, and she nodded faintly, the motion small but intentional, because those words mattered more than she could explain, and he glanced briefly toward the hallway, then back at her, as if calculating something quickly. Efficiently, and without another word he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his movements precise, controlled, and he stepped a few feet away, speaking quietly but firmly. "This is Daniel Whitmore. I need emergency services at my residence immediately." And the name meant nothing to her in that moment, it passed through her awareness without connection, because her focus had narrowed again, not to survival now, but to staying present, staying conscious, staying aware of the life she still felt within her, and she placed her hand back over her stomach, pressing gently, waiting, and after a second that felt longer than it should, there it was, a small movement, softer than before, but still there, and she exhaled slowly, relief mixing with exhaustion, her body beginning to release tension it had held too tightly for too long, and Daniel's voice continued in the background, calm but firm, giving details. His tone never rising, never faltering, and as he ended the call, he turned back toward her, his eyes scanning quickly again, noticing everything, the way her shoulders slumped slightly, the way her breathing shifted, the way her focus drifted for just a second too long, and he stepped closer, crouching again, keeping himself at her level. "Stay with me, Emily," he said, using her name now, though she did not remember telling him, and something about that anchored her further, pulled her back just enough, and she looked at him, her gaze unsteady but present, and nodded again, slower this time, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return, as if acknowledging that effort, as if recognizing the fight it took just to remain there, and outside, faint through the walls, there was a distant sound, barely noticeable at first, then clearer, a siren cutting through the storm. Growing closer with each passing second, and Emily heard it, not fully, not sharply, but enough to understand what it meant, and for the first time since she had stepped out into the snow, something inside her shifted completely, not just determination, not just survival, but the quiet, fragile certainty that she had made it far enough for the rest to unfold without her having to fight alone. The sound of the siren grew stronger, no longer distant, no longer uncertain, but cutting clearly through the storm outside, rising and falling in steady intervals that filled the quiet space inside the house, and Emily Carter heard it more distinctly now, each pulse of sound anchoring her further, pulling her away from the haze that kept trying to close in, and she focused on it the way she had focused on the light, on the door. On every step that had brought her here, because now it meant Something different, not just hope, but arrival, and Daniel Whitmore moved toward the front window, his posture still composed, his movements controlled, but there was a subtle urgency beneath it now, a readiness, and he pulled the curtain aside just slightly, enough to confirm what he already knew, the flashing lights reflecting off the snow, red and blue cutting through the white storm, approaching fast, and he turned back toward her immediately, his attention returning fully, as if nothing else mattered more than the space she occupied in that moment. "They are here," he said, his voice steady, not raised, not dramatic, just clear, and Emily nodded faintly again, her body heavier now, her head tilting slightly as if the effort to stay upright had increased, and the blanket around her shoulders shifted as she moved, slipping just enough for him to notice, and he adjusted it without hesitation, securing it more firmly, making sure the warmth stayed where it needed to be, and then he stepped closer again, crouching slightly so she did not have to look up too far, keeping everything within her limited range of focus. "Stay with me a little longer," he said, and there was something different in his tone now, not urgency, not fear, but a quiet insistence, the kind that assumes strength even when it is fading, and she met his gaze briefly, her eyes struggling to hold steady, but still there, still aware, and outside, the sound of doors opening and closing, footsteps moving quickly through snow. Voices carried faintly through the wind, all of it signaling that the moment was shifting, that what had been survival was becoming transition, and the front door opened again, this time with purpose, letting in a brief rush of cold air along with two paramedics who moved in with practiced efficiency, their presence immediate but controlled, their voices calm as they approached, assessing, asking simple questions, grounding the situation in something structured, something predictable, and Daniel stepped back just enough to give them space, but not so far that he disappeared from her awareness, staying within reach, within sight, as if maintaining that connection mattered, and Emily felt hands gently guiding her, checking her, supporting her as she was carefully lifted, the movements slow, deliberate, nothing rushed, everything designed to keep her steady, and as they began to move her toward the door, the warmth of the house giving way again to the cold air outside, she turned her head slightly, her gaze finding Daniel one more time, and for a brief second, through the blur, through the exhaustion, there was recognition there, not of who he was, but of what he had done, and he gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to carry that moment forward, and then she was guided into the waiting ambulance, the doors closing behind her, sealing her into a different kind of safety now. One that moved, one that carried her away from the storm, and as the siren rose again, louder, closer, she let her eyes close just slightly, not fully, not completely, but enough to rest in the certainty that she no longer had to fight the same way she had before. The interior of the ambulance was bright but controlled, the kind of brightness that did not overwhelm but revealed everything clearly, and Emily Carter lay still as the vehicle began to move, the subtle vibration beneath her signaling motion, the storm now reduced to a distant presence beyond the closed doors, and around her the paramedics worked with quiet coordination, their voices steady, their actions precise, each movement purposeful without urgency, creating an environment that felt structured, predictable, safe, and she focused on those sounds, the soft beeping of equipment, the calm instructions exchanged between them, the measured tone that never rose, never faltered. And it grounded her in a way nothing else could, pulling her further away from the chaos she had just left behind, and one of them spoke to her directly, his voice clear and even, asking simple questions, her name, how far along she was, if she could feel movement, and she answered as best she could, her voice faint but present, each word requiring effort but still forming, still real, and when she placed her hand over her stomach again, there it was, a small movement, gentle but unmistakable. And she exhaled slowly, relief threading through the exhaustion, and the paramedic nodded, acknowledging, noting, his expression calm, professional, as if confirming something important but not unexpected, and the vehicle turned slightly, the motion smooth but noticeable, and through the small rear window she could see flashes of light reflecting off the snow, red and blue blending into something almost surreal. And for a moment her thoughts drifted, not away from reality, but back through it, replaying fragments in a way that felt distant now, the car door opening, the cold air rushing in, the empty road, the long walk through the snow, the faint light that had seemed impossible at first, and then the door, the warmth, the voice that had told her she was safe. And she held on to that memory briefly, not as a question, not as something to understand, but as something solid, something that had changed the direction of everything. And the paramedic adjusted something beside her. Checking, confirming, his movements careful, deliberate, and another voice spoke from the front, updating their arrival time, minutes now, not long, and Emily listened, letting that information settle, letting it replace the uncertainty that had defined the last stretch of her night, and as the ambulance continued forward, cutting through the storm with steady purpose, she realized something quietly, without drama, without force. The moment she had stepped out into the snow had not been the end of her story, it had only been the point where it began to change, and now, surrounded by controlled light, steady voices, and the constant forward motion of the vehicle, she no longer felt like she was trying to survive something alone. She felt carried, guided, moving towards something that was no longer defined by fear, but by what came after it. The ambulance slowed gradually, the motion shifting from steady forward momentum to a controlled deceleration, and Emily Carter felt it before she fully registered it, the subtle change in rhythm beneath her, the way the vibrations softened, the way the voices around her adjusted slightly, preparing for arrival. And then the doors opened, not abruptly, but with practiced timing, letting in a different kind of cold air, sharper, cleaner, mixed with the bright lights of the hospital entrance, reflecting off the snow, and the transition happened quickly but smoothly, hands guiding her, voices continuing, everything structured, everything intentional. As she was moved from the ambulance into the emergency entrance, the ceiling lights above passing in steady intervals, one after another, creating a rhythm that matched her breathing, slow, measured, real, and she focused on that pattern, holding onto it as she was wheeled further inside, the storm now completely behind her, replaced by the controlled environment of the hospital, the quiet urgency of professionals moving with purpose, the distant sounds of monitors and footsteps echoing softly through the halls, and she was guided into a room where the lighting softened slightly, the air warmer, the atmosphere shifting from transport to care, and the voices around her became more specific now, more detailed, asking questions, confirming information. Their tone still calm, still steady, but more focused, more precise, and she answered when she could, her voice faint but present, each response grounding her further, anchoring her in this new space where everything had a process, everything had a plan, and someone adjusted the blanket around her again, replacing it with something warmer, something more substantial, and she felt the difference immediately, the heat settling deeper now, reaching places the cold had touched too long, and her breathing began to even out. Not perfect, not fully steady, but better, and a doctor stepped into view, introducing herself clearly, her voice confident but not overwhelming, explaining what would happen next, simple steps, clear intentions, nothing rushed, nothing uncertain, and Emily listened, not to every word, but to the tone, the consistency, the assurance that she was no longer in a place where anything could happen without control, and as the examination continued careful, respectful, focused, there was a moment where everything seemed to pause, just briefly, as if the room itself held its breath, and then the doctor spoke again, her voice carrying a quiet certainty, confirming what mattered most. That both Emily and the baby were stable, that they had arrived in time, that the situation was serious but no longer critical, and those words settled over her in a way nothing else had, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady, like a weight lifting slowly rather than all at once, and she closed her eyes for a moment, not from weakness, but from relief, a quiet, controlled release of everything she had been holding on to, and when she opened them again, the room was still there. The people still moving, the process still unfolding, but everything felt different now, not because the night had ended, but because it had shifted completely, and somewhere beyond the walls of the hospital, the storm continued, unseen, unheard, no longer shaping what came next, and for the first time since it began, Emily was not measuring her life in steps or breaths or seconds, she was simply there, present, safe, and moving forward into something that no longer depended on survival alone. The room had quieted in a way that felt different from before, not empty, not still, but settled, like everything had found its place, and Emily Carter lay there with the steady rhythm of monitored sound surrounding her, each soft tone marking time in a way that no longer felt urgent, just present, just ongoing, and she kept her eyes open now, not forcing it, not struggling, but choosing to stay aware. To witness the shift that had carried her from that silent road into this controlled space. And a nurse adjusted something beside her with gentle precision, explaining each step in a calm voice that did not overwhelm, only informed, and Emily listened, not because she needed every detail, but because the consistency of that voice reminded her that nothing here was uncertain, nothing here was left to chance, and her hand rested over her stomach again, more naturally now, and when she felt that small movement once more. Steady and reassuring, it did not come as relief this time, but as confirmation, something constant, something that had remained through everything, and she exhaled slowly, her breath even, her body beginning to recover in small, quiet ways, and across the room, the doctor reviewed notes with another staff member, their conversation low but focused, and then she returned, stepping closer with the same composed presence, explaining that they would keep Emily under observation for a few hours. That they wanted to ensure both she and the baby remained stable, that everything they were seeing was encouraging, and Emily nodded, the motion easier now, her awareness clearer, and as the doctor finished, there was a brief pause, not in the work, but in the space around it, and she asked a simple question, not clinical, not procedural, but human. "Do you remember how you got here?" And the words lingered for a second, not because Emily did not understand them, but because they carried something more than information, they carried recognition, and Emily's gaze shifted slightly, her thoughts moving back through the night, not in fragments this time, but in sequence, clearer now, the road, the cold, the walk, the light, the door, the voice, and she spoke slowly, her voice still soft but steady. "Someone opened the door," she said, and the doctor nodded, acknowledging, making a note, and the nurse beside her glanced briefly at a chart, then back at Emily, and there was a subtle exchange between them, something unspoken but understood, and as the moment passed, the doctor added quietly, "Whoever it was, they called for help immediately." And Emily absorbed that, not with surprise, not with confusion, but with a quiet understanding that what had happened was no longer just about what she had endured, it was also about what had intervened, what had changed the outcome, and as the room settled again into its steady rhythm, she lay there with that realization, not searching for answers, not questioning why, but recognizing something simple and profound, that somewhere between being left alone and being found, something had shifted in a way that would carry forward, long after the storm had passed, long after the night had ended, and for the first time, the story she was in no longer felt like something she was trying to survive, it felt like something that had already begun to turn. The hours that followed did not feel rushed, they unfolded with a steady rhythm that gave Emily Carter time to return fully to herself, piece by piece, her awareness sharpening, her body responding more naturally, and the room remained consistent, the same soft lighting, the same measured sounds, the same quiet presence of people who moved with purpose but never urgency, and some time later, a nurse entered again. Not with equipment this time, but with a small tablet in hand, her expression professional but carrying a subtle weight, something more than routine, and she approached Emily with a gentle tone, explaining that there was additional information they needed to share, that it might help clarify how she had been found, and Emily listened, her attention focused now in a way it had not been before, not because she expected something dramatic, but because she understood that this moment mattered, that it connected what had happened outside to what would come next, and the nurse turned the tablet slightly, showing a paused video frame, grainy but clear enough, a view of a snow-covered driveway, the edge of a property line, and there, barely visible at first glance, a figure moving slowly through the storm, and Emily recognized it instantly, not because of detail, but because of the movement, the posture, the way the figure leaned forward with each step, and she felt something shift inside her again, not fear, not shock, but recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of what she had gone through from a perspective she had not seen before, and the nurse tapped the screen, letting the video play, and it showed everything in silence, the figure approaching, the slight stumble, the steady continuation, the moment she reached the door, and then another figure appearing, opening it, bringing her inside, and the video ended there, simple, direct, undeniable, and the nurse spoke again, her voice calm, explaining that the homeowner had security cameras covering the property, that the footage had been reviewed and preserved, that emergency services had been contacted immediately after the motion alert triggered, and Emily listened, her gaze still on the screen even after it went dark, and she processed the information slowly, not overwhelmed, but deliberate, because this was more than just confirmation of what had happened, it was evidence, it was clarity. It was something that existed outside of memory, outside of emotion. Something that could not be questioned or dismissed, and the nurse added one more detail, almost as an afterthought but not without meaning. The homeowner stayed on the line with dispatch until help arrived. And Emily nodded faintly, her mind connecting the pieces now, the camera, the light, the door, the voice, all part of a sequence that had unfolded without her knowing. And as the nurse stepped back, giving her space again, Emily rested her hand over her stomach once more, feeling that steady presence within her, and she understood something with a clarity that did not need explanation, that what had happened on that road was no longer just an event, it was a turning point that had been seen, recorded, and carried forward into something that would not disappear with time. And as she lay there, fully awake now, fully aware, she realized that the night had not only changed her direction, it had created a truth that would follow every step that came after. Morning arrived quietly, not with sudden light but with a gradual softening of the darkness beyond the hospital windows, and Emily Carter lay still, awake, her gaze steady now, her breathing even, her body no longer reacting to the night but recovering from it, and the room around her reflected that same transition, calmer, slower, the urgency replaced by routine, by check-ins and quiet reassurances. And she rested one hand over her stomach again, feeling the steady presence that had carried through everything, not fragile, not uncertain, but constant, and she let that feeling anchor her fully, not to what had happened, but to what remained, and the door opened softly, not with urgency, but with intention, and Daniel Whitmore stepped inside, his presence the same as before, composed, measured, without unnecessary movement, and for a moment he simply stood there, not intruding, not rushing forward, just acknowledging the space, and when Emily looked at him, there was no confusion. This time, no distance in her recognition, only clarity, and he inclined his head slightly, a simple gesture, respectful, controlled, and she understood it without words, understood that this was the man who had opened the door, who had changed the direction of everything without asking for anything in return, and he spoke then, his voice calm, even. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." And the words were simple, but they carried weight, not in how they were said, but in the fact that they were said at all, and Emily nodded, her movement steady now, her voice still soft but no longer fragile. "I am," she said, and the truth of it settled between them, not as a conclusion, but as a beginning, and there was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, not empty, just present, and then he added, almost as a statement rather than a reassurance, "The footage has already been secured." And Emily absorbed that, not with surprise, but with understanding, because she had seen it, she knew what it meant, and she knew what it would become, not just a record of what had happened, but a line that could not be erased, and she met his gaze again, more directly this time, and there was something different in her expression now, not just gratitude, but resolve, quiet, steady, unspoken, and he seemed to recognize it, not reacting, not commenting, just acknowledging it with the same controlled composure he had shown from the beginning, and after a moment, he stepped back slightly, not withdrawing, but allowing space, as if understanding that whatever came next was no longer his to shape, and Emily watched him as he moved toward the door, and as it closed softly behind him, the room returned to its quiet rhythm, but something had shifted again, not in the environment, but in her, and she lay there, fully present, fully aware. Not of what she had lost, not of what had been taken from her, but of what remained, and of what would follow. And as the light outside continued to grow, steady and certain, she understood something without needing to say it aloud, that some people walk away from a life without looking back, believing the story ends there. But sometimes, it is only the moment where the truth begins to follow them, step by step, until there is nowhere left to go but forward into what they tried to leave behind.